A beautiful California model, her career on the rise.
Hi, my name is Linda Sobek.
Linda was very professional.
A photographer known as one of the best in the business.
A very well-regarded photographer.
Their lives collide in the desert heat outside LA.
He said I was the last person to see her.
This had all the hallmarks of a sexual assault-related death.
What happened to Linda Sobek?
Thursday, November 16th, 1995. A typical sunny morning in Southern California. Just south of Los Angeles, in the quiet oceanside town of Hermosa Beach, 27-year-old model Linda Sobek was preparing for a busy day of work. Sobek, a former cheerleader for the Los Angeles Raiders football team, was about to head out to a photo shoot. Just before leaving her home, where she lived with 3 roommates, Linda spoke on the telephone with her mother, Elaine.
She told me that she was going to a photo shoot and that she would call me back later on that day.
Although Linda didn't get into the details of the shoot, she did tell her mother she'd be back later that afternoon for a meeting. Mother and daughter were in the habit of talking often throughout the day. But Elaine Sobek didn't get a second call that Thursday. Anyone who phoned Linda's home only got her answering machine.
I will be on location all day today, so I will not have access to a telephone. However, leave a message.
As the day wore on, Linda's mother began to worry. Her concern only increased the following morning.
I received a phone call from her boyfriend that morning and asking me if I'd heard from her. And I said no, and that's when I called her pager. It said it wasn't accepting any calls.
That afternoon, Elaine and Bob Sobek reported their daughter missing to the Hermosa Beach police. Detective Raul Saldana was assigned the case.
It was a basic missing persons report, which is not unusual around this town because it's kind of a party town. They'll report a missing and then they show up.
But later that night, when Linda's mother still hadn't heard from her daughter, she began to fear the worst.
I knew something was drastically wrong. I knew, because she was one that was punctual and she always checked in, and she just didn't do stuff like that, disappear or without telling me.
That weekend, Linda's friends and family swung into action. Missing person posters were printed and plastered around Hermosa Beach.
Could you please call the number below?
As the weekend progressed, the story of the missing model quickly spread. By Sunday night, news reports on Linda's disappearance played all across the Los Angeles area.
27-year-old Linda Sobek is a model and former Raiderette cheerleader. Authorities say she went to a last-minute photo session on Thursday and never returned.
Images of Linda saturated the airwaves. The media latched onto her good looks and high-profile career. Along with being a Raiderette, she also modeled for calendars and appeared in ads for cars and trucks. By Sunday night, police had received hundreds of tips. But their first big break came the next evening, Monday, November 22nd, when a highway worker called police and told them he'd found some photos in a trash can.
He took the photographs home because he thought she was attractive. He saw the news flash and he realized that the pictures were the same person that was reported missing.
The man turned the photos over to police and told them the location of the trash can, along a narrow highway in the Angeles National Forest, an hour north of LA. The next morning, police went to the forest to collect the rest of the contents of the garbage can. On Tuesday, November 22nd, word got out about the discovery of Linda's photographs. Search teams made up of police and Linda's friends and family, including her father, descended on the nearly 700,000-acre national forest.
We're optimistic that the fact that we didn't find her leads us to believe that she still is alive.
Friends of the family, strangers, everybody was just so involved in looking for Linda. They searched every place that they could think of.
The following day, after an alert citizen notified police, Linda Sobek's white Nissan was found near her home, parked at a Denny's restaurant.
We checked the Denny's and found that her vehicle was still parked there and the security card club was intact.
By now, police had examined the items recovered from the trash can in the forest. Intermingled with the garbage were Linda Sobek's day planner, more photographs of her, and loan documents for a Toyota Lexus SUV. Police checked with Toyota headquarters and found the car had been loaned to a man named Charles Rathbun. Rathbun was a local photographer who had arranged to use the car for an auto magazine photo shoot.
We did some research on Mr. Rathbun and found out he had been arrested a couple of times for assault, particularly sexual assault.
There was a phone number for Rathbun on the Lexus paperwork. Saldana called the number.
I spoke to Mr. Rathbun on the phone. I told him I was investigating the disappearance of Miss Sobek. And he informed me that he had met with her on the day of her disappearance at a Denny's restaurant.
Rathbun said he met Linda to talk about a photo shoot with the Lexus. But after looking at her portfolio, he said he didn't think she was right for the job, and they went their separate ways. But Rathbun's next statement alarmed the detective.
He said I was the last person to see her. That's when we got the sheriff's department involved.
2 houses north. It's got the white with the green trim.
Charles Rathbun lived in a modest California bungalow in Hollywood. Police set up surveillance on Rathbun, while Detective Saldana kept in touch with him by phone. Over the course of several conversations that day, the detective noted that Rathbun was becoming increasingly agitated and was beginning to sound drunk.
I was pretty sure that he was either responsible for her disappearance or responsible for her murder.
Sometime during the afternoon, Rathbun contacted 2 friends, a woman named Shannon Meyer and her neighbor, attorney James Nichols.
He said that he was in trouble and he needed to speak. I went home and did not think much about it further until Shannon Meyer came running up to my house with a note that Charlie had faxed to her, and it was clearly a suicide note.
In the note, Rathbun wrote of his desire to, quote, end this farce, and that he was, quote, just trying to work up the courage to finish this. Alarmed, Nichols and Meyer drove to Rathbun's home in Hollywood. They knocked on his door and rang the bell. The window shades were drawn. The house was quiet.
Shortly thereafter, he wanders out of the house with a gun in his hand.
Rathbun, Nichols said, appeared to be drunk. He had barely stepped out of the house when the gun went off. A bullet fragment ricocheted and grazed Shannon Meyer's arm. With their own cameras rolling, police, who had been conducting surveillance, now descended on the house and took Charles Rathbun into custody. Soon, he'd make a stunning revelation, leading police to a discovery in the desert.
Earlier in the evening at 1937 Canyon Drive in the city of Hollywood, Los Angeles Police Department responded to the scene of a shooting. We believe it was an attempt suicide.
November 23rd, 1995. After firing a gun while on the front lawn of his Hollywood home, Charles Rathbun, apparently drunk and despondent, was taken into police custody. Police suspected that Rathbun, a photographer, was somehow involved in the disappearance 7 days earlier of a model named Linda Sobek. Now investigators needed to learn how their paths had crossed in the first place.
The
27-year-old Linda Sobek was the picture-perfect image of a California girl. Born in 1968, she grew up in a working-class neighborhood near Los Angeles, just minutes from the ocean. She and her brother Steve were the only children of engineer Robert Sobek and his wife Elaine, who stayed at home to raise her son and daughter.
She was a typical little girl growing up. She was Miss Independent. She was in the various little clubs and things at school.
In high school, Linda became a cheerleader. She also did modeling work and entered beauty pageants. The money she earned helped pay for college. After graduating in 1988, Linda landed her dream job as a cheerleader for the Los Angeles Raiders football team.
She was a Raiderette, and that was pretty exciting when she did that.
Here, Linda is talking to Raiders football fans just before leaving the Raiderettes.
I want you all to know that I'll miss you, and it's been like the best 2 years of my life, and God bless you all.
After cheerleading, Linda pursued modeling full-time.
She was very ambitious. Linda and I were just starting to have time together.
While Sobek kept busy with modeling, she had her sights set on her next career move, that of a television actress. Jack Nerad, a Los Angeles journalist, closely followed Linda's story and wrote a book about the case.
Her looks were kind of her ticket out of, maybe that kind of blue-collar existence that she had in California to the stardom of Hollywood. I mean, it's not a long way to Hollywood in a literal sense, but in a figurative sense, it is a very long way.
On the day of her disappearance, Sobek was scheduled for a wardrobe fitting for the TV series Married with Children. She never made it. Detective Saldana thought the only man with any answers about Linda's disappearance was Charles Rathbun, now sitting in an interrogation room, sobering up.
I entered the room and I spoke to him. He had obviously had been drinking. I told him that I was there to talk to him about the disappearance of Miss Sobek.
At first, Rathbun was hesitant to talk, but as the officers pressed him for help in finding Sobek, he began to open up. Contrary to what Rathbun had first told police, he now said on the day of Linda's disappearance, the two had met at a Denny's parking lot and gone on a photo shoot. He said they traveled to the El Mirage dry lake bed, about an hour east of LA. The location is often used for automobile commercials and photo shoots. Rathbun said he wanted a shot of the car doing circles, kicking up sand, but he said that Linda couldn't perform the maneuver.
So he went to demonstrate how it was done.
Then Rathbun dropped a bombshell.
He said that he had accidentally hit her with the vehicle.
Rathbun told police he had wanted to take Linda to the hospital, but then realized that she had stopped breathing. Rathbun said he panicked and buried her in the desert. Saldana's missing person case had suddenly shifted to a murder investigation. On the afternoon of November 23rd, Rathbun led police to the area around El Mirage.
He drove us around the desert of Palmdale and Lancaster area and showed us various locations in the desert, but he couldn't find exactly where she was buried. Towards the end of the night, he started heading towards the foothills of the Angeles Forest. We searched around there throughout the remainder of the evening. We were unable to locate Miss Sobek.
Later that night, Charles Rathbun was taken back to the Hermosa Beach Police Department. Based on his statements, he was arrested for the murder of Linda Sobek. Rathbun spent the night in the Hermosa Beach jail. The next day, he made another apparent suicide attempt.
Mr. Rathbun slit his wrist and had wrote in blood on one of the jail cell walls that it was an accident. He didn't mean to hurt anyone.
Saldana took Rathbun to the hospital, where he revealed more details.
He told me that he had placed a large rock on top of her so the animals didn't carry her away, and he agreed to go with us to Angeles Forest to look for her.
The next day, November 24th, Saldana took a bandaged Rathbun up in a police helicopter to continue the search for Sobek's grave. Also along for the ride was Rathbun's friend, attorney James Nichols.
So we fly around in this big Sikorsky helicopter. The canyons look the same, the mountains look the same. We flew for a long time.
As the helicopter circled, police teams kept up a ground search, headed by L.A. County Homicide Detective Mike Robinson.
Yeah, the Angeles Crest Forest is a large geographical area, nearly the size of Rhode Island.
With its dense trees, rugged mountain terrain, and steep canyons, the forest is a popular recreation spot. It has also been a dumping ground for murder victims.
Over the past several decades, there's been several homicide and suicide victims retrieved from various canyons and roadsides throughout this area. We brought a couple of bloodhounds up at the time to search the area just to see if we could get any kind of scent.
Along with the dogs, Robinson deployed a massive amount of manpower. This was in addition to a large group of volunteer searchers, Linda's friends and family.
We had hundreds of people all over this area, you know, just going down trails and dirt roads.
As the day dragged on, hopes of finding Sobek were fading. Then, with the sun beginning to set, Charles Rathbun put an end to the search for Linda Sobek's body. From the air, he pointed out a small retention wall wedged between a dirt road and a low hillside. Buried below the wall, in a shallow grave, was the body of Linda Sobek. With the daylight disappearing, sheriff's deputies were left to guard the burial site overnight. The following morning, crime scene investigators led by criminalist Heidi Robbins began the painstaking process of exhuming Linda Sobek's body. Despite being buried for 9 days, the body was in remarkable condition.
It had been very cool, it hadn't rained. So she essentially was just refrigerated those entire 9 days and was almost perfectly preserved so that we could really assess what had actually happened to her.
To investigators, it was clear that Linda Sobek's death was not the result of a car accident, as Rathbun had claimed. There were ligature marks around Linda's ankles, indicating that she had been tied up.
This had all the hallmarks of a sexual assault-related death.
While Sobek's autopsy revealed that she had died of strangulation, the coroner, Dr. James Reby, found evidence of brutal sexual violence.
He also discovered that she had been sodomized with a lot of interior trauma.
Trauma, it was determined, resulting from penetration by a foreign object.
There was no semen on her clothing. There was no semen in any portion of the sexual assault kit. There was no semen found in any of his articles of clothing that were tested.
Investigators were unclear as to what kind of object had caused the trauma, but whatever it was, the damage was extensive.
This was brutal. This was torturous. This resulted in bruising up against her spine.
When Robbins examined the Lexus SUV used during the desert photo shoot, she found more evidence that Sobek had not been hit by a car.
It was a pristine car. There were no scratches, there were no dents, there was nothing visible on the exterior of that car.
The interior of the car, however, told a very different story.
I noticed right away that the vehicle had an attempted cleanup of blood, and the center seat had visible blood on the stitching of the leather seats. It had what we call shadows, where it had been wiped away, but the perimeter of that blood stain was still present and visible.
The findings are not consistent with a death due to an automobile trauma.
On November 27, 1995, the LA Coroner's Office announced that Linda Sobek had died of asphyxiation and that she'd been sexually assaulted, supporting what investigators had found. Armed with Rathbun's statements and a car with blood evidence, prosecutors filed first-degree murder charges against Charles Rathbun. Later that day, Charles Rathbun appeared in court and entered a plea of not guilty. 2 months later, the state filed an additional charge of rape by a foreign object. The prosecution would now set out to uncover who Charles Rathbun was and begin to build their case against him. Charles Rathbun was born in 1957 in Encino, California. During a vacation as a teenager, Rathbun was given the family camera and quickly discovered what would become his professional calling. In 1979, Rathbun was studying photography at Ohio State University. It was here police discovered that a disturbing pattern involving women began to emerge. Rathbun, who had also worked at a grocery store, had been accused of sexual assault by a female co-worker. Rathbun claimed that it was consensual sex. He went on trial for rape and was acquitted. In 1981, after his parents divorced, Rathbun went to visit his mother in Detroit. He decided to stay and secured an apprenticeship with a leading automobile photographer. Over the next few years, Rathbun showed talent and began to excel in the competitive field of automobile photography. By the mid-'80s, he was shooting covers for some of the industry's leading magazines.
Pretty accomplished photographer, and he worked for all of Peterson magazines, kind of an all-around photographer within a big publishing company.
In 1988, Rathbun returned to Los Angeles, where his success continued, but his run-ins with women continued as well.
There were some problems that Charlie had with female employees. Some thought he was overly attentive.
Over the course of 3 years, 2 more women filed sexual assault charges against Rathbun. All the charges were ultimately dropped. Like Rathbun, Linda Sobek was a rising star in her field. Given the small circles they moved in, author Jack Nerad says the model and the photographer were bound to work together eventually.
Charlie and Linda had a professional relationship, and maybe relationship is even overemphasizing what they had. They worked together a couple of times.
However, during his investigation, Mike Robinson, the LA County Sheriff's lead detective on the case, found a number of people who said that Rathbun had an inexplicable, deep-seated hatred of Linda Sobek.
One person told us that he referred to blondes as throwaway people. He supposedly made the remark that someday we'd see Linda Sobek's picture on a milk carton.
But when Rathbun ran into Sobek while working at an automobile trade show, he acted friendly.
And before Rathbun left that day, he indicated that he may have come across some work that he would like to talk to her about.
One month later, Linda Sobek was dead, and Charles Rathbun was facing a first-degree murder charge. Attorney Mark Worksman would handle Rathbun's defense.
The facts of the case were very dramatic and very grim, and I knew right away that this is a case that's going to have to be handled very sensitively.
Worksman began by interviewing his client, who told him a very different story than he had told police. Rathbun claimed that Linda Sobek had accidentally died during a struggle they had after drinking and having sex. And Rathbun said he had proof. In addition to the modeling shots, he claimed to have other more sexually explicit photos of Linda.
After Charles Rathbun was arrested, he met with his brother at the LA County Jail. His brother, Robert, was an attorney, but he directed Robert to where he'd left some photographs that he'd taken of Linda Sobek on the day that she died.
4 months after Linda Sobek was found dead, Worksman received 5 rolls of film from Robert Rathbun and brought them to court.
We would turn these undeveloped canisters of film over to the sheriffs. We would let them develop them.
Mr. Worksman said that these films showed proof that there had been rough sex between Charles Rathbun and Linda Sobek.
Detective Robinson took the film to John Shaw, the supervising photographer at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department's Digital Imaging Unit.
Well, Detective Robinson arrived here at the lab early in the morning, and we documented him unsealing and opening the package that he received from the court. It showed signs of having been out in the weather or the elements, water damage, possible heat damage.
4 of the 5 rolls of film showed Linda Sobek posing on what appeared to be the El Mirage dry lake bed, the supposed location of the photo shoot. The last roll of film was double exposed. Although damaged, that roll of film showed in graphic detail the midsection of a woman masturbating on the front seat of what looked like a Lexus SUV. Due to the graphic nature of the images, American justice cannot show the photographs. Here was the proof, Rathbun's lawyer said, that the two had been intimate.
Mr. Rathbun's defense is his assertion that Linda Sobeck's death was an accident that resulted from a struggle they had after having some consensual sexual relations. This was the only evidence that he had, really, to corroborate that part of his story.
But criminalist Heidi Robbins had spent hours examining the Lexus and had studied the photographs as well. She says she noticed that something wasn't right.
It was readily apparent that wasn't the Lexus. So it kind of led to the next question. If it's not the Lexus, is that even our victim? Is that Linda Sobeck?
Robbins and her colleagues compared the autopsy photographs of Sobeck with the high-resolution reproductions of the woman in Rathbun's fifth roll of film. Based on their examination, Robbins said they could only draw one conclusion.
It became very clear, very quickly, this in fact was a complete sham.
February 1996. At the Los Angeles County Courthouse in Torrance, the battle lines were being drawn in the trial of 38-year-old photographer Charles Rathbun. Rathbun stood accused of the rape and murder of model Linda Sobeck.
You have this beautiful victim and this professional photographer who seemed to have everything in the world to lose by doing something as stupid as raping and murdering a model who was working with him.
At a pretrial hearing, defense attorney Mark Worksman accused police of acting illegally by not advising Rathbun of his rights when they first questioned him about Sobeck's disappearance. Worksman claimed the interview following Rathbun's failed suicide attempt amounted to intimidation and coercion.
Mr. Rathbun's statement was obtained under very extraordinary circumstances. The police interrogated him and they elicited from him an admission that not only had he killed her, at the time he claimed it was an accident, but that he had buried her body and he knew where the body was.
Worksman argued that since Rathbun's statements were obtained illegally, every piece of evidence tied to the recovery of Linda Sobeck's body should also be excluded from trial, including the body itself. It was a bold maneuver. Without a body as evidence, the autopsy report wouldn't be allowed either. To prosecutor Stephen Kay, that report was a crucial piece of evidence. The injuries detailed in the autopsy, Kay believed, were irrefutable proof that Sobeck did not die during consensual sex. Especially damning, Kay felt, were the ligature marks found on Linda Sobeck's ankles.
You couldn't get around the ligatures. There's no way that the defense could explain that. There's just no reason why she's going to be tied in ligatures with her legs tied apart and do all the damage that she did if this was all voluntary.
In his ruling, Judge Benjamin Aranda excluded from trial many of the statements Rathbun made to police. But the judge did allow the autopsy report and evidence based on the discovery of Linda Sobeck's body. He noted that Rathbun cooperated with authorities.
The information he provided during the helicopter ride, including pointing out the gravesite, were voluntarily made.
On September 30th, 1996, nearly a year after Linda Sobeck disappeared, the murder trial of Charles Rathbun got underway. Anticipating extremely graphic evidence and testimony, the trial judge, Donald Pitts, agreed with a request by the state not to allow cameras in court. In his opening remarks, prosecutor Stephen Kay took jurors back to November 1995, when Linda Sobeck disappeared. Kay detailed how the search for Sobeck soon led police to Charles Rathbun, whom Kay described as a sexual predator who had worked with Sobeck before and hated her. The state claimed Rathbun drove Sobeck into the desert, viciously assaulted her, then murdered her to keep her quiet. Kay said that Linda Sobeck, through her injuries, would now reveal the truth.
I told the jurors, Linda Sobek is going to come out of her grave into this courtroom and tell you exactly what happened to her, how she was tortured at the hands of this human monster.
The defense painted a far different picture, describing how a day of heavy drinking led to consensual sex, a struggle, and ultimately an accidental death.
I told the jury that at the end of the case, you're going to have a reasonable doubt as to whether this was a vicious sexual assault that turned into a violent murder. Linda Sobek's death was an accident.
Worksman told jurors they would hear from the defendant himself and see photographs that would back up his story. As prosecutor Stephen Kay began presenting his case, he called to the stand Dr. James Reeby, the LA County coroner, who performed Sobek's autopsy and took photographs of her injuries.
He was the star witness, no question about it. He had spent so much time studying Linda Sobek's body, and he had taken 8x10 photographs of every injury.
Dr. Reeby described a brutal rape and provided graphic details, using both his testimony and his photographs. Reeby concluded that Linda Sobek died through asphyxiation.
There was more than just the strangulation. He finally figured out that what happened is that Rathbun, 6'3" and 230 pounds, was sitting on Linda Sobek, who was 5'3", 112, and the force of his weight, along with the fact that he was choking her, that's what killed her.
Criminalist Heidi Robbins told jurors about the apparent attempt to clean up blood on the inside of the Lexus, and how she believed Sobek had been tied up and sexually tortured.
The ligature marks were heaviest on the inside of her legs, which means that her legs were tied apart and she struggled in life to try to close her legs.
Another witness was sexual assault expert Dr. Laura Slaughter. Through her testimony, the state offered up a shocking theory as to what might have been the foreign object used to sodomize Sobek. It was a theory the state landed on just before Slaughter testified.
The night before we were talking, and she said, "Tell me, what is Rathbun into?" And I said, "Well, he's into guns." When the police searched his place, they found about 200 guns. And it was just like a light went on, and she said, "That's it. That's what he used. He used a gun. He sodomized her with a gun."
Prosecutors thought Rathbun may have used the same gun he fired the day he was taken into custody. They immediately took the gun to the crime lab for testing.
It was analyzed, and they found just right below the barrel, the little piece protruded that had kind of a grid design to it, and on that the criminalists found that it tested positive for human blood.
The prosecution next called to the stand two models who recalled Rathbun talking about Linda Sobek.
Here we had Rathbun telling the models about you know, how he hated Linda Sobek, that she was a little, pardon my language, a little bitch, and that he would never work with her again. And so why is he calling up Linda Sobek to take her out for a photo shoot?
October 1996. In a Los Angeles courtroom, the defense began presenting its case in the rape and murder trial of Charles Rathbun. The jury had already heard a graphic presentation from the state, which contended that Charles Rathbun hated Linda Sobek so much that he viciously bound her up, sodomized her with a gun, then strangled her.
All the things that they had on Charlie, it was a very uphill battle. Very much so. I felt sorry for the defense attorney because he had such a hill to climb.
To help his case, attorney Mark Worksman believed it was crucial that his client testify.
Only two people knew what happened between Charles Rathbun and Linda Sobek that day, and one of them was dead. So if Charles Rathbun didn't get on the witness stand and tell the jury what happened, there was no evidence really to support his defense. So he had to testify.
On October 17th, photographer Charles Rathbun took the stand and told the court his version of the events leading up to Sobek's death. Rathbun testified that he had hired Sobek for a photo shoot in the desert with a Lexus SUV, then, at her request, focused his camera on her.
According to Mr. Rathbun, Ms. Sobeck had asked him if he would take some individual photos of her for her portfolio. She was posing in some revealing clothing. She was having a good time, appeared to be vamping for the camera a little bit.
But to juror Pauline Stokely, the photographs seemed to indicate something far different.
I think in some of those pictures that were taken with her standing, if you take a close look at the gal's eyes, they're not very happy eyes. And if you've seen pictures of her modeling before, she has a big smile and her eyes are bright and dancy.
Rathbun testified that the photo shoot soon turned steamy.
They'd been drinking. They'd had some consensual sexual contact. Some of the photographs showed what Mr. Rathbun said were Linda Sobeck's private parts.
Though revealing, the photos lacked an important element.
The problem with the photographs was that I don't believe there was a single photograph that actually showed the entirety of Miss Sobeck so that we could clearly establish that it was she nude in these photographs.
Rathbun next told the jury that after all the drinking and sexual play, he tried to show Sobeck a trick with the car but nearly hit her. She got angry. An argument followed, and then things turned ugly.
Miss Sobeck had become violent. He tried to restrain her. He got on top of her. He meant no harm. She accidentally was asphyxiated, was choked by his actions.
Watching him testify, I think, was very chilling to a lot of people, because he's putting out a story that is implausible, unbelievable, and yet that's what he's saying.
From the initial interview by Raul Saldana to the rough sex story to his ultimate testimony in court, there was 3, 4, 5 different versions of this story, and it just kept changing to fit whatever crisis was at hand or whatever we'd uncovered.
Charlie wouldn't look at anybody except his lawyer. And it was like it was very much rehearsed.
On cross-examination, the state zeroed in on Rathbun's photographs. When Rathbun again testified that the nude photos in the Lexus were of Sobeck, prosecutors reacted quickly. The judge allowed the state to present its own witnesses to challenge the validity of the photos. Prosecutor Stephen Kay brought criminalist Heidi Robbins back to the stand to testify about how she had compared Sobeck's autopsy photos with the photos in question.
A criminalist looks for landmarks, moles or ridges of skin or whatever, and she said absolutely with 100% certainty the woman in the photograph was not Linda Sobeck.
We were able to definitively show, in fact, this is not Linda Sobeck. This is not consistent with the appearance of her body at the time of her death. This is not consistent with the type of car seat that's visible in this picture. This is not consistent with the dress that she was wearing.
It was a critical issue because it boiled down to this question. Did Mr. Rathbun have clear evidence that Linda Sobeck had engaged in voluntary sexual contact with him, or had he fabricated evidence which would reveal him to be a liar?
Charles Rathbun knew it was fake, and he was a cooked goose.
In closing, prosecutor Stephen Kay focused on what he said were the defendant's shifting versions of events.
I just hammered Charles Rathbun for all the lies he had told. I went over every injury that Linda Sobeck had. Everything he had to say on a critical subject just fell apart.
I argued passionately as well that this would be the most difficult thing that the jurors would ever have to do, to parse through these facts and reach a fair conclusion. And I tried to encourage them to leave passion aside, leave prejudice aside, and look at the facts.
After nearly 2 months of trial that included more than 40 witnesses and hundreds of exhibits, the jury began its deliberations. Pauline Stokely was elected forewoman.
We talked about every issue that was there and looked at all the pictures, all the evidence they had, the witnesses.
Outside the jury room, it was an anxious wait.
You just got to hear that. They've got to make sure that he find him guilty. Okay?
That's
what we all want.
We were apprehensive, we were nervous, we were afraid, and it was all out there, and if the jury believed him, he was going to be acquitted. If they didn't believe him, then it was hopeless.
In the end, it took jurors only 6 hours to reach a decision.
There wasn't too much that we had to argue about. Finally, I said, does anybody want to take a vote? And they said yes, and all 12 hands went up.
On November 1st, 1996, nearly a year after leading police to her grave, Charles Rathbun was found guilty of the murder and sexual assault of Linda Sobeck.
They were able to convict him so he can't harm anyone else and ruin somebody else's family.
The Sobeck family, I think, was overjoyed at the guilty verdict, but at the same time incredibly saddened, because nothing can replace their loved one. That monster, they would describe him, took something very precious from them.
At Rathbun's sentencing 6 weeks later, Linda Sobeck's parents got the chance to address the court and their daughter's killer.
How can you sit there the way you do every day? Doesn't this bother you?
I've never really known what it was like to despise someone as I despise this person.
The judge sentenced Charles Rathbun to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The state had not recommended the death penalty, a move Prosecutor Kay now regrets.
We thought at the beginning of the case that Rathbun was remorseful for what he had done. I learned, even before the end of the trial, that the only one he was feeling sorry for was himself.
Charles Rathbun will go to his grave maintaining that she died as a result of an accident, that he meant her no harm.
As for Linda Sobeck, friends and family still hold on to her memory and to the dreams she left behind.
I wish she was still here. We'd be having fun together. Linda wanted to eventually settle down and get married and have her own family. I miss her every day. I always will.
All New Crime and Punishment is back at the same time tomorrow with some brutal revenge. Next, murder detectives in Dallas investigate a robbery carried out with extreme prejudice. We count down the first 48.